If you There we go. If you would prefer to ask your questions using the microphone, you're welcome to do that. Just know that you might be captured in that recording. Welcome for anyone coming in. I'm just going to invite folks to sign themselves in here. I'll jump ahead to the slide. If everyone can take a minute or probably less than a minute, just navigate on over to this link, enter the passcode and enter your student number. That would be great. So my name is Danielle. I am the Graduate Career Educator at the UBC Career Center, which means my role focuses on supporting master's and PhD students from all disciplines. I may have met some of you before in advising or other workshops, so happy to see everyone on the call today. Today's session is occurring as part of Launch a Career in Canada, which is our annual suite of programming designed specifically to support international students at UBC. I will mention a few things. So if you weren't aware that that was part of the programming that's happening, I would invite you to check out some other events that have happened and are going to be continuing to happen over the next little while, organized by some of my colleagues. In particular, I will highlight an upcoming in-person event next week. So this is going to be an in-person on-campus panel, some great insights from individuals who were former international students at UBC. You'll notice that 3 out of the 5 have completed graduate level degrees. We can, of course, get great insights from folks who have completed their bachelor's as well. So in particular, if you're around next week and able to join us, please do that. As everyone is coming in, thank you. My colleague Irene is going to be helping out in the chat, so you can see the attendance link there. If you would like a copy of the slides after today's presentation, please do use that link to sign yourself in. As folks are coming in and joining, I'm guessing that some of you are in Vancouver today, maybe on campus. Many of you may be elsewhere in BC, in Canada, around the world. So I'd like to invite you to have a moment to reflect on where you are located during this session and what you know or perhaps don't know about the history of that land. For myself, I am facilitating today on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. It is a privilege and a responsibility to be facilitating and sharing that space, and it's always an important thing to acknowledge and reflect on. Before we wrap up today, I will make sure that you folks get my contact information. If you do have any other questions or are seeking other types of support after the session, you're welcome to reach out to me. As I mentioned, there is that information in the chat if you need to sign yourself in. If you've already done it, great. In terms of our agenda for today, I think most people have been able to join. I want to start with just identifying and acknowledging some common career challenges for international graduate students. Part of the reason why I believed it was important and the launch coordinating team believed it was important to offer today's session is that as international students pursuing a master's or a PhD, there are some distinct challenges that are different from undergraduates and from domestic students. So I want to hold some space to talk about those. The middle portion will be some resources and strategies that I have pulled together to provide some of the common information and supports that might be useful to you as graduate students. And then we will have ample time for Q&A. So if you do have questions about anything related to career, you're welcome to put those in the chat at any time. I will come to them periodically, or there will be that time towards the end of the session to ask those questions. As I mentioned, you're welcome to put them in the chat, or if you'd like to use your microphone, just know that we are recording today's session. One other piece that I will acknowledge, just as there's quite a few people on the call, which is wonderful to see. Graduate students, right? Some of you are master's students, some of you are PhD students, some of you are in research-oriented programs, some of you are in course-based professional programs, and you're in a wide range of academic disciplines. So some of these pieces will look different and have a different context depending on your degree, the type of your program, your academic background, and of course, your own personal career goals, career values, and priorities. So feel free to ask questions if you'd like some help contextualizing, and also know I would invite you to take what works for you, adapt it, modify it, and leave what doesn't. Some common career challenges that may be especially pertinent when I speak to master's and PhD students who have come to UBC as international students. Translating experience in a way that I think is different for students at the graduate level. It can happen for undergrads as well, but many graduate students are bringing sometimes very extensive professional experience. And for international students, they may be bringing that professional experience from another country or another context. So one piece that can be challenging planning or preparing or entering into a career is thinking about how to translate that international professional experience to other jobs, to your academic program. I want to acknowledge that that's a really, really common question that comes up. Related, particularly maybe for folks doing research programs, describing and positioning your graduate experience to future employers, particularly if you're going to move into industry or the applied setting. You know, I often talk with graduate students about the reality that graduate studies is a stage in your education. It's also a stage in your career. You are doing work. You are doing work for the university. You may be managing a project. You may be actually managing and supervising research assistants or undergraduate students. You may be doing a practicum or a capstone as part of your degree. So making sense of the way the graduate experience is often complex and maybe not captured fully by the idea of being a student. Some other pieces that can come up, common decision points, right? Some folks who are currently doing a master's may be thinking about, do I want to continue on to a PhD or to future education, or am I at the point where I'd like to enter the workforce? If someone is studying for their PhD, they may be wondering, do they want to look for a career in academia as a postdoc or a professor, or move into industry or an applied setting? There are, of course, other decision points, but those are some common ones that may come up. Because of, you know, what I've said about graduate school being a kind of interesting space that is partially work and partially study, there's often competing priorities that might come up during your time as a graduate student. You may be choosing between spending more time building your career and more time publishing or doing an additional research study. You may be choosing between working as a research assistant or a teaching assistant versus trying to gain industry experience. You may be wondering, is it better to finish my degree faster or take a bit more time and gain experience along the way? There are no right answers to any of these questions, and I hope in today's session I can offer some strategies for how you might start to evaluate them. I would also invite you, if you are thinking about these types of questions, to connect with me or my colleagues. But again, these can be hard choices to make as you are navigating graduate studies. And then finally, in a way that sometimes is a bit unique or different, if as a graduate student, you are perhaps in a slightly different life stage than some of our undergraduates, you may be thinking in quite specific and nuanced ways about competing values, about things like work-life balance. Does the career path that I want allow me to also have time to do the other things that are really important to me? Can I find the job I want in a place that I can live and that my family can live? If I have a partner, children, parents that I'm caregiving for, all these pieces can definitely add complexity to career navigation, career decisions. Some of these things may be resonating with you. There absolutely may be other things not listed here that are impacting your experience of career. You're welcome to add things in the chat if any of these resonate with you, or there's other things coming up. But if you are feeling like it is hard to navigate career as an international graduate student, I just want to say that yes, I think there are some very distinct and particular challenges. I hope that today's session can speak to some of those and offer some resources. So, given that context in mind, there are also, I think, some really incredible opportunities that can come with career building as a graduate student, especially at an institution like UBC that really does offer a multitude of resources and options. If anything, it may be the case that there's too much information and it's hard to know where to start or how to navigate that. So again, if you're wondering about what is the best fit for you, you're welcome to reach out to me. I would also say talking to other students in your program, talking to a program coordinator. If you are in a research-based program with a faculty supervisor or faculty members who are part of your committee, those are great folks to speak with as well. Mentors from industry that you might be hoping to move into, they may be able to help point you in the right direction, because you cannot do everything. And I think it is just helpful to think about that. I know as a grad student, there can be a lot of pressure to do more, gain more experience, publish more if that's applicable, write more. And I think there's value to that, but there's also value to understanding your own personal priorities, your limits, and how you want to manage the time that you do have. As you're starting to think about career building, I would always open the door to thinking about multiple options. You may come into a graduate program with a very clear idea of a career goal and a career role that you hope to be working in. It is also really normal to start a graduate program and not have that clarity. Maybe you aren't sure yet. Maybe you have multiple choices. Maybe your goal was to continue your studies because you just really, really love that academic field. It's all okay. As you progress through your grad studies, I'd invite you to think about what things catch your interest, what types of roles, what types of positions, who do you encounter who seems to have an interesting job title. Keep a list, right, somewhere, if it's helpful to you, of potential types of work options. It may be the case that as you progress, you realize that's not going to be the right fit for you. But I think one of the best resources you have as a grad student is curiosity and an open mind about multiple career options. I'd also invite you, as you begin and progress through your grad studies, to think about your own values and your own goals. What do you want from the grad school experience? Why did you choose to do this program, right? You didn't have to. Many, many people in the world do not make that choice to continue to do further academic studies. So what's most important from you, for you? And, acknowledging that may be different from your peers, from people in your program, maybe even from your supervisor, if you have one. This is a common thing that comes up for graduate students. They have an idea of what they want, but you look around and maybe you think, no one else in my program is talking about this thing, or no one else in my program seems to be interested in that career path. That may or may not be the case. It may be the case that other people are interested in just not talking as openly about it, but it is your grad program and it is your career, and it is okay to think about what is the best match for you, and that might be different from what other people are focusing on. I know some of you are probably at different points in your program, so if you are getting close to graduating or coming to the end, that's perfectly fine. If you are earlier in your program, the sooner I think you can start exploring and thinking about these career options, the better. It just gives you a bit more space to maneuver, a bit more time to try things. And I'll also suggest, if applicable, as you start to come across different paths, get introduced to different career paths that you might be curious about, if it feels accessible and available to you, can you talk with your supervisor, your committee members, other mentors about those career options? I know that sometimes graduate students have really good and valid reasons for not wanting or not being able to, and that's okay if that's the situation you're in. But if there are people that you feel you can be open about and you can share some of the career paths that you're considering, I think having those conversations allows people to help you and allows you to maybe customize and design, your graduate program. I've definitely talked with grad students where they said, when I shared with my supervisor that this was the career path I was most interested in, they were like, okay, then let's start doing this within your program because that's what's going to be most helpful for you. Welcome to anyone coming in. There'll be a link in the chat for you to sign yourself in if you'd like a copy of the slides. If you are starting to navigate some of these questions about exploring career options, and as I said, some of you may have a really clear idea, which is great. If you don't, some questions that might be useful to reflect on, to talk with people about, why did I decide to do this program? Were there career options that drew me towards wanting to do my master's or my PhD? Those may well have changed, but sometimes even checking back in with yourself to say, when I first started thinking I wanted to go to grad school, what was I hoping it was going to lead to? Was there a career goal that I had in mind? Is that still applicable? Researching what alumni from your program have gone on to do. Some of them may be doing things that you're not interested in or that are not a fit for you, but they have similar skills to the ones you will have by the time you graduate, and they probably have some overlap in interests. So if you're wondering, what does someone with a master's in this field do? Look for the people who have a master's in that field. You can certainly also look to alumni from other schools or similar programs as well. What types of jobs do they have? When I work with grad students, they often are quite surprised and then kind of pleased to see that there are alumni from their program doing a variety of things and that those might be career paths they could consider as well. What skills is my program equipping me with? Sometimes I think when we are in like the thick of a grad program, it is hard to actually take a step back and think about what skills am I learning? What skills will I have by the time I graduate? This is a great thing to talk through with someone, but this can also help you to understand what career paths might be a match. And I think this is sometimes particularly helpful for folks in research-based programs where it is a reality that not always will the subject of your research be an exact match to the work that you go on to do. I'll use myself as an example here. I have a PhD in English literature. The core content knowledge of my thesis topic would not have helped me to understand what career paths I might want to pursue. When I took a step back and thought about, well, what skills do I have? I have oral communication skills, I have clear and concise writing, I have an interest in narrative and people's stories and being able to facilitate and present. Those skills were more helpful to me than thinking about, here is my thesis topic. So just another kind of way to consider it. And then I think also really helpful, what experience is also incorporated into my program. I'll talk more in a second about gaining experience as a graduate student. And I know there can be some particular interest in that, especially for international graduate students. Not always, but sometimes some graduate programs will have relevant work experience baked into that. If so, where is that work experience coming from? Are those potential employers? There are those potential employers that I might be able to look to, or again, that might be able to guide me towards the type of work I want. All right, a few really just practical things, and I like this list because these are things someone can do whether you are in your first week of the program or about to graduate. If you are like, I need to start taking some action steps towards exploring and building my career. Informational interviews, which means a conversation with a person who is working in a field you might want to work in, or you could identify a program alumni. This is one of the single best things you can do to understand potential career options, to determine if they're going to be a good fit for you, to see if that's a path you want to go down. I'll speak more about these in a second and how you would set them up. But if you are brand new or coming to the end or somewhere in the middle, one great thing to do would be to think about who can I talk to learn more about potential career paths. You can also look at job postings. If you have a bit more of a focused perspective and you're like, I have some ideas of the type of job I might want, start looking at some postings and see what those postings are asking for. Even if you're not going to be applying for 6 months, a year, multiple years, the postings won't change that much. And if you are 6 months or a year or longer away from graduating and you start looking at some job postings, you have time to see, okay, this is the language they're using. These are the skills they're looking for. What can I do during my time in grad school, whether that's taking courses, certificates, attending workshops? What can I do to really position myself as employable when I graduate? I touched on this earlier, but as you hear about different opportunities, as you see upper level students in your lab, in your department, in the field that you work in, as they start graduating, getting jobs, moving off, keep a list of where they're going, what you hear them talking about, where they've applied. I think what this helps with is feeling like career is not such a black box. It is okay if you don't know for sure what you're going to do after you graduate. Most people don't, but if you have some ideas, I think that can be really empowering. And then the other piece, which I will touch on in a minute, is potentially look to gain some experience by testing and trying out different things. This might take the form of collaborations, consulting, internships, working with an industry partner, pursuing a postdoc. But as you start to identify some career paths that you might want to consider, one way, of course, to see if you're going to like it and if it's going to be a fit is to get some experience, ideally without going all the way into an ongoing job. Just briefly, I mentioned the idea of informational interviews. It is okay to talk to people as part of your career exploration. In fact, I think it is really, really important. I know it can feel tricky if you're an international student and maybe you're newer to Canada, or you maybe feel like most of your connections are within your academic department and within academia. But think about, people you're meeting, other graduate students, supervisors, past employers, family members. Even if they aren't directly connected to the work you want to do, they might know someone who is. And I think the more you can share, I'm looking for this type of job, or I'm interested in learning more about this type of work. Do you know anyone who does that? If so, can you introduce us? Most people like to feel helpful. I think if they got that request, they would at least think about it. If you can do this early, you're also planting that seed, right? If I came to Irene today and said, I'd like to talk to someone who does this type of work, she may not be able to think of anyone off the top of her head. But a week, 2 weeks goes by, she's at an event, she meets someone, she now has that idea to kind of put those pieces together. So as you reflect on where your interests might lie, what you might want, the more people you can essentially tell what you're looking for, it allows them to kind of be on your team. It allows them to send you resources, referrals, introduce you to people. I'll just touch as well on the idea of what am I hoping these conversations will lead to? Because that's a really legitimate question, right? I know I want to work in this field. What is the value of me talking to someone who works in this field? To understand and really be able to assess, is this a role I might be interested in? To understand how you would connect yourself to that role. So if I have a deeper idea of what a policy analyst does, I can more effectively pitch myself in an application, a cover letter, an interview. And I think grad school is really good preparation for this. If you think back to the first day of your program, there were almost certainly acronyms, jargon, specific programs, funding opportunities, key theorists, and you didn't come into the program knowing that. But kind of through immersion and exposure and being in that environment, you've probably absorbed a lot of that knowledge. Same thing goes for most professional paths. If you started talking with consultants or policy analysts or research scientists in biotech, the more time you kind of spend immersed in that professional environment, the more you are going to be able to assess whether you want to be there and come across as someone who is prepared to enter that path. So that kind of, in my mind, is the value of having those conversations with people in the career path that you might be most interested in. I'll touch on gaining experience as well, and then open it up for some questions. Feel free to type in the chat if you'd like to. So gaining experience is important. And I think it's also complicated if you are a graduate student, because being a graduate student is essentially a full-time job, often more than a full-time job. So it is worthwhile to reflect on what types of experience you can gain and how you might want to do that. But I always kind of want to stress to people, how can you gain related experiences and skills within your degree? Because it may not always be feasible for you to also do an internship or also work part-time or do these things on top of your grad program. If it is, wonderful. For some people, it definitely is. But if it's not, how can you leverage the experience you're already getting within your graduate program itself? If it is possible for you to take on additional things, this isn't a complete list, but some common ones that might be of interest to you at UBC. Mitacs for folks in research programs offers kind of sponsored industry partnerships for research projects. So you, your supervisor, and an industry partner would work together on a research project. It could be a great way to gain some experience. The sustainability scholars, they still have, I think, a few projects posted. They're on an annual cycle for graduate students working on topics related to sustainability. They hire people every year to work on projects, again, with municipalities and different partners. WorkLearn is paid part-time on-campus work. Those postings for the summer cycle are just about to go up in the next couple of weeks. Many of the postings are open and available to graduate students, so worth taking a look at those if you are looking for paid part-time work on campus. If any folks are thinking they might want to work in higher ed, eventually WorkLearn can be a great way. If you're in the Faculty of Arts, the Arts Amplifier program might be of interest, so on and so forth. Of course, some programs, not all, but some may have co-ops, internships, practicums incorporated. I was just talking with a master's program this morning about getting prepared to apply to internships. So if that is part of your program, great. If it's not, I think that would be the first step. Is it viable? Is it feasible? Or is it something where I want to take the experience from my program? And related to different types of experience, the sort of first chunk of this slide is paid experiences. And of course, as a graduate student, there is going to be a lot of value to paid experiences. There are also some experiences that are not paid, but may be valuable as well. And if you have funding, if you have a TA-ship, you may have the possibility of gaining other types of experience. The Graduate Student Society, some other roles are paid, but it also has opportunities to get involved with student government. I know some students have made great connections and gained great experience from that type of leadership experience. If you are interested in working on specific topics or with certain populations, not-for-profits or organizations in Vancouver, especially if you can get into kind of like a joining the board or a member or a leadership position, you will meet some interesting people. You can expand your network a bit outside of UBC. If it's related to your expertise or your research, it could be in another type of way that isn't quite having a job, but gains experience. And then, of course, depending on what you're interested, developing your own projects, personal projects, building a portfolio of work In some cases, what might be most useful as you prepare to look for work is to be able to provide examples, right? If you want to do work as an editor or a graphic designer or, whatever it might be, or a facilitator, they may want to see things that you have done. So starting to produce those, either part-time, freelance, to have models and examples of your work, again, is different from like getting hired into a job, but might be something to consider. And I'll just quickly touch on a few common questions, and then I'll open it up for questions from you. It is okay if you're thinking, I'm about to have this master's or this PhD in this academic topic. I don't know what kind of jobs I can get with this degree. Really, really normal. Again, I'm happy to speak with you about that. But some general points, I mentioned this before, thinking about skills, not discipline. You can think about discipline too. If you're a mechanical engineer, there are probably a pool of jobs that lend themselves well to that. But think about the things you know how to do, because jobs won't always be categorized according to academic discipline. They will likely be categorized according to skills and competencies. Going back to your interests, right? One thing I always ask graduate students in advising is, what do you want to do? And yes, it won't always be, feasible, but I think there is a grain of something really important and interesting there. So if you are considering different pathways, what do I want to do? And then let's figure out whether I could get there, whether there's a version of that, whether there's a compromise. And looking to other experiences potentially outside of your academic program. If you are loving your academic program and you want to do work that looks a lot like that, wonderful, that is a great outcome. If you are not loving your academic program, or you're not loving the experience of doing research, that's okay. You've learned something valuable as well. How do we think about the things that I am interested in, and how do we bring those together? I want to make sure we have lots of time for your questions. I'm going to pause there. Those are some of the key resources and strategies that I think can be really helpful. And I'd love to narrow in on some of the topics you'd like to cover today. So if you want to put some questions in the chat, or if you'd like to raise your hand and you're okay with having your voice in the recording, what questions would be most useful for you at this time? Miriam, go ahead.
Hello. So I think one of the things that I would say could be relevant for me is the in-person networking and how to approach that. So, I mean, I'm able to connect with people on LinkedIn and send emails, and sometimes I don't receive the responses to the emails that I've sent, which is totally fine and normal, but how to approach then the in-person networking. Thank you.
Yeah, and are you thinking of like an event where maybe something like Launch, where there are going to be people there and you're hoping to speak with them?
Yes, exactly. Or like, what are some of the events that we can attend as well in the context of Vancouver and UBC, besides the careers fair that is coming up?
Yeah, great question. Okay, so let's talk about types, and then we can talk about strategies. I would do a couple things. I would look for professional associations related to your interests, because if someone's goal is to work in biotech versus to work in a museum, different events are going to be more relevant to you. There absolutely are quite general kind of meetup would be where I would start, just kind of overall networking events, but often they're going to be a bit more field specific. And I would look for professional associations related to the type of work you want to do. Again, someone from our office could support with narrowing that, but typically if you have an idea of the type of role, I would search for either Canada or BC Professional Association and that topic. Just off the top of my head, and I can include these with the slides, but I'm thinking about something like SWIST with the Society for Canadian Women in Science and Technology, or Life Sciences BC. If someone was in that space, those might be some professional associations to check out to get involved with. Conferences, if there are conferences happening related to your field, can you go? And also, can you look into volunteering? Again, there's probably people people who are active, who are organizing. Those can be professional, academic, or both. But again, it's getting you into spaces where you could interact with people. Yes, those would be some of the ways I would think about going about that. And then the other piece, those kind of events are great. They're going to be typically busy, crowded, noisy, which I know is not a fit for everybody. So I think the one-to-one coffee date where you actually schedule time to, and it could be Zoom or it could be in person, but especially if you identify as a bit more of an introvert or you want to have a deeper conversation with someone, if you can actually say, you know what, Irene, can we have some time on Tuesday from 2 to 2:30 to talk about those things? You can do a combined strategy, but I think both of those will give you value in different ways. As to what you do in those contexts, I think your approach is going to be a little bit different if you know you are going into that more scheduled one-to-one conversation. You can do some research, and I would prepare some questions in advance to think about the type of questions that you want to ask. I would always go back to, like, by the end of this conversation, what would help me to make some decisions or take some actions? Is it that I really want someone to just tell me what the difference between quality assurance and quality control is? Is it that I want to kind of get someone's take on which of these two firms would be better to be doing an internship? Would I like someone in my field to tell me, I have one elective course next term, which one is going to be the most useful for me to take? Like, what you ask is going to vary, but I think you're looking for something that's strategic, that's insightful, and helps you to move forward. You can, of course, ask multiple people, get multiple perspectives. But whether it's in kind of a one-to-one or more of a group setting, I think the more prepared you can be and the more you can kind of, I have an idea of like, what would help me with a decision or an action or a step forward, the more value you're going to feel like you've gotten. If that conversation turns into like, let's talk about job opportunities, or do you want to work with us? Great. But it won't always. So if it doesn't, what's the kind of insight that would help you to move forward? See a few questions in the chat, so I'm going to come to those and then we'll come back. Internships. Do companies care about what age, what level of degree you're in? Are they generally okay with PhD students? How about students over 30? So legally, a company cannot discriminate on the basis of age. They can't say, we don't want to hire this person over 30. I guess I should offer a proviso. I suppose if it was something like government-funded program or like there was an age eligibility, I'm thinking about like certain programs. But generally speaking, for a job, they can't legally say, we don't want to hire this person because of their age. Would that subtly impact the hiring process? Maybe. There are many things that could happen during the hiring process, but generally speaking, I think if you show up with a clear understanding of what the role is and you're signaling that you are willing and enthusiastic to do that role, I think that's going to be the match. As far as are they open to a PhD student would depend on the internship. You could reach out to them. You could talk to someone on the hiring end to say, I'm interested in this internship opportunity. It may be the case that they feel like the complexity of the work in the internship is not going to be a match for someone at the PhD level. It might not be. They might be like, that's great. It may be the case that they're like, we think what we would be having this intern do is not going to be a match for the skills you bring. Not a bad idea then to have that conversation about what opportunities could I look for. Maybe it's actually that they want to hire you as a part-time consultant, right? Like that might be more appropriate for your skill level and what you can do for them. But I would look for either applying or potentially initiating a conversation. Internships can mean vastly different things. And I'll say one other thing. Some internships will be advertised specifically for PhD students in some fields. So certainly you can look for those. There may be cases where they're saying we want someone who is a PhD student for this internship. If so, amazing. If not, connect with them, see if you can ask, apply, see how it goes at the interview. And if the answer is that they don't feel the internship is going to be an appropriate level of complexity or skill, what other opportunities would they suggest? Great question. How many months in advance should I start applying? Oh, I had a slide specifically on that because I know this is contested. So partially it depends on your own timeline. Are you able to apply while you're still in grad school? It may be the case that you're like, I just do not have the bandwidth to be applying until I submit my thesis or defend or finish my coursework. That's fine. It's just a slightly different cycle. And I think the question in my mind would be, can you have a gap of job searching between when you complete your studies? And I mean, some students want that, right? Please, if you can, take the time to travel, to have some downtime, to decompress after you graduate. If you need or want to be starting to work immediately after graduating, and I know being an international student can add complexity or can make that decision for you. Generally speaking, for most jobs, I would say you want to be applying 3 to 4 months before your possible start date. So I would worry less about graduation and more about when are you available to start. Also acknowledging, maybe you've submitted a thesis, you're waiting for your defense. Is that actually a window where you could be working in that time? So pick the date where you would be available to start working. And I would go roughly 3 to 4 months back from that is really viable to start sending out applications. You can always talk about this with someone in your field, and also bear in mind that start dates are somewhat negotiable. So say you were 5 months out, 6 months out, but it was really your dream job, go ahead, apply, go through that interview process if you can. If they really believe that you are the right candidate, you will probably be able to, possibly, I should say, be able to negotiate a later start date, a part-time start. If you have to move, could you start hybrid? Like all kinds of things can be negotiated typically at the offer stage. But generally speaking, if you are not available for work for a year, I would focus on building your networks, learning more about the role rather than applying. If you're not going to be available to start working for the next 12 months, talk to people. And if you are hearing things like, let us know when you're ready to work, that is a good situation to be in. But typically they may not want to make an offer if you're not going to be available to start for a long time. How do I compete with someone who has years of experience while I am just beginning in my career? I mean, yeah, that's an interesting question. And I can hear it going both ways, right? Especially for this audience. Also, if I have years of experience, am I going to be considered overqualified? So I think the answer to both is, gauge the job posting. What are they asking for? What type of skills? What do they want someone to be able to do? If you can do most or many of the things that they're asking for, and you have evidence to support that, that is a good indication you should apply. And that's actually kind of a better indication than any specific number of years. You want to be in a range, right? If you're just beginning and they're saying they want someone with 10 to 15 years experience, that might not be a match, but 2-3 years of experience absolutely might be. And if you have a graduate degree, there's no clear algorithm for how that translates into years of experience, but it means something. So if you're looking at the job posting and thinking, I can viably do this job, I have evidence to support that proposition, apply. You will not have control over whether they prefer someone with more experience, less experience. I don't think it's as straightforward as that. If you are just beginning in your career, yeah, you absolutely want to look for some more junior positions that will allow you to build experience and skills. I would also think about connecting with people in that field to ask, based on my experience, what type of role do you think I should be applying to? And I think that's a very reasonable and useful question to ask. One other thing I'll say on this, there's some great questions in the chat. Not uncommon, and I've heard many stories of this from graduate students. They applied to a job and they got a call or an email that was basically like, that job is too junior or too senior for you, but we like your profile. How about this other job? So I think there's also that. Sometimes it's valuable to just get your resume or your CV in front of people. And if they really see your potential and see that you can add value, they might kind of redirect or reposition you into a level that's going to be a better fit for you. If my career shift requires getting a certificate or degree, how do you manage that while I'm in my current degree program? Yeah, that can absolutely be complicated. I mean, that might be a case where it would be really useful to talk to a career advisor, but one thing I might consider, I mean, to be really, really transparent, how important is it to be in your current degree program if it sounds like your career goal requires something else? Do you start to think of it as an extension? I'm going to finish my master's, and then I'm also going to expect to be in school for another 12 months to complete this additional certificate or degree. You would have to figure out how those pieces fit together and whether your current program is actually supporting your career goals. If it's not, that's a valid, thing to recognize and to think about how you want to approach that. One or two other things I will say would be getting really clear on, does that career shift require that certificate or degree immediately? Is there a version of that job or something in that field you could start doing? And could you combine that with that additional certificate or degree so that you're maybe working part-time and working towards that certificate? Could you gain some experience and then decide whether you need that secondary training? If you start working, would they maybe pay for that certification, right? There's lots of different levels. And that would be a good example of something to discuss with someone. But yeah, how do you want to combine it with your current degree program? And if your current degree program isn't well aligned with your career goals, what does that mean for you? It might not mean anything, but it might be worth reflecting on. Should we consider salary ranges as a criteria for applying? How is salary negotiation? Yeah, so Irene, if you have a second, or I can include it with the slides, through graduate and postdoctoral studies, the Pathway to Success series, I'm going to be doing a webinar specifically for graduate students on salary and job offer negotiation later this month. So you're welcome to come to that. And I think they also even have a recording of a previous one. So there is resources available to you around that. But very short answer, it is pretty normal for the vast majority of jobs that negotiation does happen. So I think you can reasonably expect that you would have some ability to negotiate salary. And should we consider salary ranges as a criteria for applying? Yes. I mean, if you need to, if you are in a position where you could prioritize a lower paying job because it meets other goals for you, that's wonderful. Vancouver is an expensive city. There's lots of factors. And I think the reality is most people are thinking about salary in some way as they decide how to navigate which jobs to apply to. It may or may not be your foremost criteria, and that just depends on the individual. But yes, I think, your ability to thrive in a job and do meaningful work is deeply attached to your ability to feel safe and secure and thriving in your life, which is often correlated to your income. So it is something most people are thinking about, and happy to share those resources about negotiation. Will I be eligible to apply for an internship if I have already graduated? It depends. So the internship can set their own criteria. Sometimes one of those criteria might be that you need to be returning to school. So if you are mid-program and thinking about gaining experience, you may have some additional opportunities because you would be eligible for the type of opportunities that require you to be going back to school. If you have already graduated, there are some internships you would still be eligible for. You'd have to look at the job posting or contact the individual employer to ask and see. Yeah, oh, good question. How do I highlight transferable skills on my resume if I want to change to a new career path? And what are good examples of transferable skills? So that could look a lot of ways, right? I'll give an example that might be applicable to a lot of folks. Maybe you are moving into a role where you would be training new employees and answering their questions, and you've been a TA. That's not exactly the same thing, But I might want to, as I'm describing that teaching assistant role on my resume, rather than saying graded exams and assignments, and that's probably something you did do as a TA, maybe you want to highlight that you designed handouts and PowerPoint decks to introduce new concepts, and that you responded to questions from a variety of knowledge levels. And you got good reports that students understood the material or students did well on their exams after going to your TA-ship. So being the TA is not identical to being in this role where you might be training co-op students or training new employees, but you're highlighting the skills that are sort of similar to what you'd be doing in the job. Same thing, project management is a huge topic. If folks are doing a capstone or a thesis as part of their graduate studies, the academic research project might not be identical to the type of project you'd be doing in your job, but maybe you want to highlight that you developed timelines, that you managed other individuals who are part of their team to check in on were they reporting on their timelines, that you kept records of different operating procedures for parts of the project. Those would be kind of the transferable skills, even if the project was different. So really, it typically looks like when you're describing something on your resume, zooming out and describing the parts of it that are most similar to the job. And those may not be the parts that you thought about the most when you were doing it, right? I always like to use the teaching assistant example because I'm sure many of you are or have been teaching assistants. If you think about what you spend a lot of time doing, probably grading assignments and exams comes to mind, but that might not be the most useful part to highlight on your resume. And I would think about what about that experience is similar to the new career path you're applying to. And of course, if you want to kind of look through your resume together or with an advisor, that would be the type of thing we can support with. Thank you, Irene. So the link in there, if you'd like to register for that negotiation session, is in the chat. We have a few more minutes if there's any additional questions. And yeah, when we share out the slides, I will put the link to sign in one more time. If you haven't already, please do a sign in. When we share out the slides, that will include my contact information, so you're welcome to email me if other questions come up. In the time that we do have, any other questions or things you were hoping we would talk about? And as we are doing any final questions, just to let you know, you will be emailed a survey. Yeah, and Irene has the link in the chat. As we're getting close to 1:30, if folks have places to be, feel free to head out. But I would invite you to share your feedback through that link or when the survey is emailed out. This is a new session that we're piloting this year. Would love to hear what was useful, any suggestions for future years. So another question in this chat, should we be clear about our intentions to keep working at a certain place while doing an internship? I would say you want to be clear about your aspirations, right? Ultimately, they will probably decide whether they have an offer for you post-internship that may be more common in some internships than others. I know there are definitely some cases where the internship kind of clearly feeds into ongoing work, but it might not always. And sometimes the reality is some companies or organizations just don't have the budget or don't have the capacity to rehire their interns. So I think if that is something you want, you can absolutely share that that's something you would be interested in, and it's useful to do so. It's not a guarantee, and they may not be able to offer that. But I think if it is something you would want, it's definitely helpful to communicate that. And if, say, like during the interview process, they were signaling that that would be an asset, if they're like, part of what we look for an intern is someone who can stay on or return, is that applicable? yes, that might actually be a strength, but it may not always be the case that that's a possibility. Thanks, folks. If there's any final questions, I will stick around, but otherwise, thank you for coming out. Thank you for the questions and the discussion. Please do feel free to be in touch if I can help with other questions, and I hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon.